Jill, thanks so much for coming on the GrowOrtho Podcast.
Luke, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So tell those watching or listening just a little bit about you and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Jill Allen. I have a business, Jill Allen and Associates. I'm an orthodontic consultant. I primarily work in the orthodontic startup acquisition realm, kind of that 8 years and younger crowd. And we, for the most part, we work in all areas of, all practice life cycles, but we, in that startup acquisition, we help doctors. I always say demographics to doors open, and then that first year in business. So just helping them get all their systems in place, determine where they want to, have their practice be, and just really get off the ground and running.
In terms of, what you do now, how did you get started with consulting?
It's kind of an interesting story. When I first got into this, it was right after asking about children, right after I had my first child, my daughter Jordan, and my mother was actually in the orthodontic field, and they had an opening for a sterilization assistant, and I didn't want to go back. I had been in property management, and I didn't want to go back into that, and so I was like, well, sure, orthodontic sounds good, and so I got into a really great office and started in the sterilization area and loved the orthodontic industry and thought, oh, this is just a great industry. And I happened to have gotten in with a doctor that was very progressive. He really loved, believed in consultants, really loved continuing education. And so I got a lot of exposure to things that I would not have gotten exposure to, maybe had I worked for a different doctor. And he was also very encouraging of, learn, at that time, there were no schools out there to learn, anything in the orthodontic office. It was all self-trained. And so I've had an opportunity to start in sterilization, kind of worked my way up into clinic, then became a clinical assistant, and then became a trainer, and, just kind of kept moving along. And then through the years with multiple other offices, I knew that because of the imprint that I had from this, the being in front of the sages of our industry when they were, kind of, young and, doing everything, it was like, oh, this is, that's a cool thing. And so I would keep little notebooks, I'm leading up to how I got into consulting, but, I would keep little notebooks on, all right, this works in an office, this doesn't work in an office. And, I was just always thinking about that. And, so as I moved along, my goal was to learn every area of an orthodontic practice and to really master each area. And then 18 years ago, I decided, okay, I think I want to move into consulting. And that's kind of how I went from getting into ortho, then on into starting my business. So it was nice to have a really well-rounded background, because that has really helped me a lot, in what I do.
18 years ago, you started your business, and I feel like the industry has changed so much. We've only really been in orthodontics for going on 9 years. We started HIP about 10 and a half years ago. But, even through that time frame, there's been a lot of changes, advancements, tech. Obviously the corporate landscape and DSOs, OSOs has really kind of changed a lot too. I'm curious, over the past 18 years, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in the industry?
Gosh, so it's interesting when I think back, because if you can believe this, when I got into it, even operating systems, I've been doing this 33 years in the orthodontic field.
Wow.
Even operating systems were still new. We were running on DOS, who
That's
even
insane.
knows that, right? So to think about, even if we just think about that track for a minute, and how we have moved along, and the embrace of moving from paper into digital. And, now even, when I do startup practices, we don't even think about paper, even down to, when you're thinking about your collateral. Yes, we may still have a business card, but, everything is digital now. And so, I think about, changes in that way to, changes in just our, the tools that we use to move teeth, and what doctors are using now, it was such a fixed system. It was hardcore. I can remember, pounding on brackets, on fours, fives, sixes, and sevens, you know what I mean? And, it's
Yeah.
like, who would go through that torture anymore, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now we don't even buy bands, and
Mm-hmm.
most of the time we're starting off practices with, some type of a digital bracket and a liner system. And maybe if we're going to have a fixed bracket, it more has to do with something that's very specific, geared towards experience with a phase one. So, when I think about it from a modality standpoint, we've had some phenomenal changes. And then I think the hot one right now is we're just seeing AI and
Mm-hmm.
what is
Mm-hmm.
happening in that realm for us. We used
So
to
powerful.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. And I think, so many people are so afraid of, oh, it's going to take a job. It's going to do this. And I keep telling everybody that'll listen to me, I'm like, no, it's just going to make you more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine what you can do with your time if you free up, those 3 hours that you were, spending
Mm-hmm.
writing out your social media calendar when, you can do that like that. And now you've got time to really spend time on patient experience or this, that, or the other. So I know I'm kind of all over the place, but
Yeah.
I think you could talk about every area. I'll just say one more area that I think is really fun that we're seeing changes. And it's just really, I think, embracing that that who not how principle, in that
Mm-hmm.
there are so many wonderful third party companies that can step in and assist offices where we just don't have to have these these fat orthodontic offices anymore. And and I say
Mm-hmm.
that very lightly, it just meaning that we don't have to have just this incredible overhead anymore of team members. Now we can have very specifically trained, drilled down
Mm-hmm.
employees that are able to give really good patient experience, and know that we may be able to lean on third party companies to help us,
Yeah.
maybe accomplish things that we don't have to have in the office anymore.
And certainly the efficiencies with running digital, if you're all in, you can really kind of run more lean,
Oh, for
because
sure.
that's the model, and leveraging things like rhinogram or dental monitoring,
Mm-hmm.
as well with a digital workflow. It can really allow a practice to run lean and kind of save on payroll and those types of things. So yeah, really cool.
Yeah, yeah. I just love seeing what's out there, and I'm just gonna say yes, yes again, yes, yes, yes. Digital is where we should be heading.
Yeah.
We should be embracing it.
Yeah. And I can't even imagine back. I'm trying to think 18 years ago with the internet. I mean, so many changes with marketing and advertising. I still hear stories from dentists and orthodontists of how they had to measure their sign and send in photos to the board. And, that's completely shifted, and
Hmm.
it's so different now, and it's always changing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think about, our only way of advertising was the yellow pages. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
it was truly, and you were really slick if you could find a way to get your name under the dental column and the orthodontic column, because D came before O. I mean, like, how nuts is that? And you would think about, how do I name my practice? Trying to make sure that you came alphabetically first. Now, I mean, like, we don't even think about things like that anymore, but
Yeah,
isn't that crazy to
it's
to
so
think
crazy.
even something like that was part of a marketing strategy?
Well, yeah. And I think dovetailing that into what you brought up, which is AI, you don't want to be behind, because
Mm,
you can see, I mean, I still talk to people who are talking about, the digital version of Yellow Pages or just some really antiquated
mm,
thing. And should I spend money on this? And then you have kind of the pioneers, and then you have everybody else who's more or less doing things that are fairly current.
yeah.
But, really taking the time to understand AI or working with companies who do, all the way down to, how are you treating patients? How are you doing marketing? Are there efficiencies that the team can use AI for?
Yes.
All of that, really, because that is the future.
Mhm.
And the last thing that you want is to be the last office adopting this thing. And it's crazy, I use it for so many things that I do now, and it probably, my output has tripled since
believe it.
really adopting it. And I'm not even that versed in it, but using the knowledge graph and kind of training the bot specific ways and building bots for social media scheduling, just like you said, all the way down to understanding people and psychology. I mean, it's just brilliant what it can do.
Right.
So yeah, I highly encourage people to kind of dig in and find how they can optimize their practice with AI.
Yeah. And that, it's interesting that, you talk about that. We just got off of a big retreat. Once a
Mm,
quarter, my team, I bring everybody together and we do a big business meeting /
that's
training
cool.
retreat. And one of our topics that we were actually talking about and training on was AI and, just how to, as a team, use it better,
Hmm.
but also how to really help our offices be able to
Hmm.
use it. And it is, I think the biggest thing is it seems very scary to somebody who doesn't understand it. Oh, big brother, there's something's out there tracking my this or that or whatever. But it's so exciting. I love it when we have team members that, really start to understand it and we're helping them. And even my own team members, when I'm like, hey, we're going to write this SOP and we're going to just throw it into Chat GPT and we're going to tell it
Yeah.
the parameters. We're going to tell it what font we want it in. We're going to tell it the outline that we want, the voice, the this, the that. And, we're going to give it the main ideas and boom. And again, taking that into offices, wow, again, these are those things that
Hmm.
just eat up our time that you don't even realize.
Yeah. And I mean, offices may ask us like, hey, I need to hire this role. Do you guys have a job description? Or, and it's like
Hmm.
in the time that you took to ask us, not that I would tell them this, but,
Right,
in
right.
a soft way, like for those listening, you could literally just go to Chat GPT,
Yep.
type it in, and you can literally coach it. So with what it comes back with, you can literally give it another prompt and, hey, refine this or put it
Yep.
more in this voice or this tone. And I would just encourage anyone listening, before you go ask or before you scramble or before you think, oh, I've got to go spend hours researching this,
Mm-hmm.
literally, somebody who works in our office, they use the audio version. So they
Hmm.
like turn on the audio and just talk to it. And it just literally will spit back stuff like job descriptions or how to, like if you don't know how to do something with Facebook or Instagram,
Yes.
same thing. It's just literally right there.
Yeah. 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 It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool for
Yeah.
sure.
So how big is your team?
So we are, there is, gosh, what are we at now? I think we're up to 12 now on our
Awesome.
team. Yeah.
Very
And,
cool.
I've got a director level and then a consultant level. And then we also, have people on our Haydock site as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. How many consultants are on your team?
we've got 5 consultants. Yeah.
Okay. And is there a specific type of practice that you guys work with, or is it anything from startup to, 8-figure, everything in between? What's that look like?
Yeah, so I would say, my primary focus when I got started was working with startup practices, or I kind of coined it that 8 years and younger. So any doctor
Hmm.
that's been in a business 8 years or younger, or team members, and naturally startups fall into that. So probably where we focus the most is working with doctors who are doing startups or who have done an acquisition. And, when
Mm.
I got into this 18 years ago, when I started this, what I saw was that there are these really amazing doctors coming out, wanting to do their own practices. And, there we can see there's been such a decline in senior doctors selling their practices that it's
Mhm.
almost kind of pushed doctors into having to do startups where that would not have been here 20 years ago, 30
Yeah.
years ago. Um, and so I saw this, this deficit, I thought, in the consulting realm, where I was like, we've got all of these young doctors and they're coming out. They don't really have an opportunity to purchase. They have to do a startup, but they don't know how to be a business owner. They don't know how to set
Mm.
up those fundamental systems that we can walk into any big, practice that's been running 5 years or more. And those core positions are all in place. Somebody took the time to figure it out, set them up. So I I saw that opportunity and thought, this is really where I want to live. And
Mm-hmm.
so we, for the most part, focus on that 8 years and younger crowd. We also do a lot with 8 years to retirement. So I've got a lot of docs that they know that they're getting to a point where they're going to want to retire, but maybe their systems aren't up to date. They just aren't they just aren't primed and ready to be able to get the money that they want out of their practice. And so we'll go in and help them kind of get it up to, we'll say 2024, 25 standards. And then it just helps them then, have a nice handoff for a doctor. We do work with a lot of doctors in that in between, but I just really love that the two shoulders. Those are really where we want. And if we're working with a doctor in between, it usually has to do with they've lost a lot of institutional knowledge. Maybe they've had a lot of team turnover, and it's back to the fundamentals again. We got to put these core areas in place. We've got to reestablish things that maybe we're running on autopilot that the doc was like, I don't know how to do financials. My financial coordinator's been here for 20 years, And so now we're coming back in and helping them set those systems back up.
Yeah, certainly since COVID, team turnover has been like the number one topic. Very, very different.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's sad because, again, if you were to look at historically, it would have been nothing to have a team member stay with you all the way through your career, where a doctor could really say, they've worked with me for 20 years. I tell doctors now, we're lucky if we get 2 to 3 years out of a team member. If you get more than 2 to 3 years, I think that you are definitely doing something right. And, if I could stand on a soapbox for a minute, I think some of that issue has been, and I've really been working with my docs to really make sure that they understand this, is we have to make sure that our team members see a position in our office as a career and not just a job as to moving on to something else. And so I just think we've got some work still to do in our industry to kind of make it where team members aren't like, oh, I'm going to go work at their front desk until I can get into vet school or until I can get into whatever.
Right.
I mean, we've got an incredible, just an incredible industry. I just don't think we've done a good job at showcasing that it can be it can be a career for somebody.
Yeah, for sure. I think painting the picture of the upside to the team is really important. As the practice grows, how could you grow? It seems like that's what young people are most focused in. If they can't grow and they don't know what they're working towards, they're like, I'm out,
Yep.
And so no longer can you be in the days of, oh, I'm just going to hire somebody to answer the phones. When in reality, the person answering your phone should actually be a very skilled person.
Yes.
Yes. And so what's the upside as that position grows or hit certain goals, or how can we incentivize them? I think is just really, really key.
Yeah. And I think it is, bringing it back to the very basics, even, and this is a little controversial, but, I coach and strongly believe this, that we should be pretty transparent with our pay scales too. At this level and this amount of training you have, you're going to make between this and this. At this level and this amount of training and additional, job duties and whatnot, you're going to make this. And it doesn't have to be that, oh, I only move up if I'm moving from clinic to TC, or I only move up if I'm moving from this role to this role. I think we should be incentivizing for within each of our core positions and be very transparent that if you want to make more, if you want to do more, we're going to be really transparent that there is movement and it's easy to see. And I think what's interesting is we start to see that, most of our employees will probably be level 2 employees. They kind of get to a point and they get really comfortable with, with that level. Not everybody, wants to be that level 3 or that, that lead person, though I think a lot of times we want to push everybody into that, but realize we can't have a whole office of chiefs, right?
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
So I think just having a bigger understanding of what that actually looks like. And I always pull it back to the trades. When you think about I think the electrical or electrician, the electrical industry is such a good one when you kind of think about how they move people along. And
Yeah.
again, going back to that career thing, I know I'm on a little rant here about that, but that's,
it's good.
I think it's just a good way to think about that. If you want to think about how do we keep employees and how do we keep them longer than 2 to 3 years. And I especially believe with the younger generation, they got to know that there's a purpose for them, or they're going to keep moving on. It isn't just about the pay either. They want to know that there's substance to what they're doing.
And you have to be plugged into their goals. Like, what is their goal? What do they want to accomplish? Do people want to be the top 20% or just kind of the middle 70, or, what are their desires and where do they want to grow? So, what do you see as the main constraints with a startup practice? Especially today, you're coming out with typically a lot of debt. Prices since COVID have gone way up. So obviously there's financial constraints, but what do you see as the main constraints that it kind of holds that startup practice back?
Probably the biggest hurdle in getting started is finding the right location. And, I always say, we work with clients from, demographics to doors open and then through that first year. And if I have an opportunity to meet with the client when they are actually getting started and, before they've engaged even with a commercial broker, we spend a lot of time working on the demographic component of it because, I think it's so easy to be like, I think this is going to be a good spot. It just feels good. I like the vibe of the area, this, that, or the other. And then you go out and you pull these demographics and you're like, wow, you're telling me you want to have this real boutique-y practice, but, do you realize the median income is $70,000? And, we've got a less than 50% ownership in the area. And, and I think what's important is if we can kind of identify and help doctors figure out that demographic component and make sure that we're putting them into the right spot. From there, I think kind of the hurdles of getting the loan, getting the equipment, getting the office designed, that can all work itself out. We know right now that I'm going to quote for 2024 where we're at. Banks will easily lend $750 to $850 for a startup. So, and I joke that it's kind of like getting, candy on Halloween. It's pretty easy to get that money. Surprisingly, it's actually easier now than it was even 10 years ago, which is nuts to me. But so getting the loan isn't the issue. Getting the build out and, all of that is just establishing the right area. And then I think from there, it's hiring the right team and then making sure that we've got good marketing strategies because like I'm always telling my docs, in this first year, it is all about brand awareness. We need people to be aware that you're here. And if they can't find you on the web, you don't have a good website with good SEO, if you don't have good marketing, and it can't just be one channel of marketing, you really need to do them all. That is what's going to make the difference between you hitting your first year goals or not hitting your first year goals. And then I think as the practice gets open and they're going through it, I think it's for a doctor being careful with, they still have to pay for all of the things, right? They still have all those fixed expenses. So even though it's easy to be like, oh, hey, I'll get everybody started with $99 down and $99 a month. That's great for an existing practice, not great for a startup when you've got 20 to 25,000 in fixed expenses that you have to figure out how to come up with, and you've got 75,000 in working capital for the year. So,
and
I think just
fees being so much more expensive on the front.
Yeah. So I think just being really strategizing through that and helping them. I always talk about this as being the unsexy side of, of the business, is helping them understand that backside of it. Not only do you have the forward facing great patient experience, it's all fun in the office. Now you've got to deal with what does your QuickBooks look like? And are you reconciling your accounts? And, are you doing what you need to do to keep yourself safe so that you hit those numbers so that the AR grows and then you're moving into that next year?
It sounds like so much. What do you and your team help with within all of that? I mean, obviously you can advise, but if you're going to roll up your sleeves and really get your hands dirty, what does that look like? Like if I were to come to you, I'm doing a startup, What are some of the key things that your team would help me with?
All of it. I know
All
it's
of it.
crazy.
Wow.
We literally do everything that we just talked about. So on the front side of it, we're helping them through, demographics, to helping them find their brokers and their loans, figuring out their budget, to determining equipment and how is that going to fit into the budget, into
Mm,
space design, then into operating systems. Are you going to use a Mac? Are you going to use a PC? What works better? All of that. And then when we get
wow.
in to getting ready to open, then okay, you probably never hired an employee before. Do you know how to write an Indeed ad? Do you know how to do interviews? How do
Mm,
we do an offer letter? Okay. Do you know how to set up your handbook? All right, now we got to train. Do you know what to do when a patient comes in? So then it's just moving in and training on all core areas once we get doors open, to make sure that all of those fundamental core systems are in place, so that the doctor, is just set up and ready to go by the end of that first year, and they've hit their financial goals, they've hit their marketing goals, and they're just really set and solid. Because my goal as a
mhm,
consultant, and I know this almost sounds backwards probably, is I don't want clients tethered to me from here until 20 years from now. I want to give them
mhm.
really good fundamental systems, and know that when they're ready to move to that next level, which I get calls all the time, usually year 4 or 5 with a startup, and they're like, "Okay, Jill, we're about a 2 million plus practice now, and we're
Mhm.
ready to move. We need to get better systems in place. We're ready to do this or that." I love those calls because I know that
Yeah.
the foundation was there, and now we're ready to, train and just move right on to that next level. But back to your original question, we do work in all of those areas, because if a doctor doesn't understand even how to set up their chart of accounts and their QuickBooks, it can be disastrous if they, if they
Mm,
don't realize that their money that they're collecting, for those down payments isn't actually hitting their bank account. And I can tell
right.
you, I have had multiple doctors that they just didn't know to look. They just didn't
Wow.
know to look.
Yeah. You don't know what you don't know.
No,
Yeah.
uh-uh.
At what point do you see leadership come into play? I can kind of relate with this in my own business. I was a really good technician. I could do
Mhm,
all the
mhm.
work and I could design and take photos and edit video and, place ads and all this stuff. But then as the team started to grow, the weak link was leadership. And I kind of had to shift from doing all the things to stepping back, letting the team do it and learning how to lead. But I see this every day in orthodontic practices where they're kind of at that break point,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of frustration around that because, orthodontist is already so busy. They have to be hands-on within the business. But at a certain point, you really have to focus on building up leaders and
Mhm.
knowing where to spend your time and managing that and protecting that carefully. Where do you see that come into play?
We touch on it a bit as we're getting going in this first year. Something as simple as writing out your values, and
Mm,
you know just having an understanding of values, and then value-based decision making, and how that will work and impact you in your practice, and having an understanding of what does it mean, when you think about experience, and managing a team member. Because again, most of the time, most docs have never even had to be in a position where they're over somebody, where they have to run up against somebody. And so we do coaching along the way with that, but definitely not leadership like what you're talking about. And I personally think, even looking at myself in business, I think you really start to understand the importance of that at about year 4 or 5 in a practice,
mhm.
where you can't just coast anymore, and you can't be Superman or Superwoman. And I think, in our first years, I think all business owners we're very much, we've got that Superwoman, Superman complex, right? I can do it
Mhm.
all. I can keep track of it all. And there comes this tipping point, or this breaking point, where you really have to trust your team. Yeah, again, I'm going to use that, we have to trust our who's, and
Mhm.
hopefully you have put those in place. But I think it's a very difficult thing, because it takes the doctor, it takes that work, that interpersonal work as a business owner, to constantly be working to be better. Yeah, you're tired, but Are you reading business books? Are you getting out there and exposing yourselves to, different trains of thought, different podcasts, different, things
Mm-hmm.
that help you be a leader? Because ultimately, I think if you cannot be a good leader, you just will not have a great practice.
Yeah, you're capped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a point where I think you could make the argument, well, you could eventually put somebody in place to be that leader, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to be making a pretty good amount of money to have somebody in place
Yeah.
to really be able to do that for you.
And then you have to lead that person, you know? So,
Exactly.
yeah.
It still has to happen. And so I
Mm-hmm.
would love to say that, it happens earlier. I can look back and say, gosh, I wish even me, when I look back at
Mm-hmm.
the Jill 18 years ago is very different than the Jill now. And I hope to be very different than who I am 10 years from now, another
Yeah.
18 years from now.
Yep.
But I commit myself to doing the work though. And I think
Mm-hmm.
those of you who do the work,
That's the
and
key.
it really is. And it's just little things, little nuggets. It's not a whole book. You may read the whole book and you may pull one little thing out of it and be like, that was the, the turning point to this next
Mm-hmm.
thing, to opening my eyes up to this or that. So I think it's a ever growing,
Mm-hmm.
process. And I think, being willing to adapt and just know that you cannot do it all. You can't. You'll be
Yeah.
your own bottleneck.
Yeah. Adaptability is huge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, kind of nearing the end, this has been an awesome discussion. But when you think back over the past 18 years, and maybe there's one story, I know you probably have tons, but the one story that's like, this story, this office, this doctor really represents why we do what we do, and you don't have to share names or anything, but
Mm-hmm.
paint that picture for us, what is that story, maybe that situation, and how that doctor office team kind of grew with you guys?
I don't think I'm going to pick it at one, but
Okay.
for us, and I think this will answer your question. Every year, I have between 1 and 2. We might end up with 3 this year. But
Mm,
practices that hit $1 million. They do $1
mm.
million in their first year,
Wow.
and that is and I say that to answer your question. What I have seen consistently with my practices that hit that, and I have a lot that come really close. So, it's
Yeah.
it's almost like this internal joke with a lot of my docs, like, I'm going to be the one. No, I'm going to be the one.
I
We have
love
a
that
lot that,
healthy competition. Yeah.
yeah. And, we have a lot that, are in that 700 to 800 mark, but, to hit $1 million or over $1 million. And what I consistently see with at least our group is that I've got doctors that are very aware of their vision and where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
They have done the work and put in the time to commit to what it takes to just doing everything and trusting the process, just trusting
Mm-hmm.
that there isn't a single place that I can slack on. I can't be like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, well, I'm going to work at my associateship job and then I'm going to try and come in 4 days here, 4 hours here and 2 hours here and an hour here and think that that's going to work.
Right.
They have seen the vision, they have understood, the assignment, and they have executed from start to finish. And they are very self-aware of the learning that they need to do. So it wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
Jill just spoon feed me everything and that way. I mean, they did the work to be engaged, to have the conversations, to go through the training, to be committed all the way. And I think, that is just such a fun thing to see, because it becomes very apparent in they're just constants that I see with my docs that hit those numbers. They've got very
Mm-hmm.
similar traits. And it's not that, oh, well, they're just smarter than the other ones, or they, because I mean, heck, every orthodontist out there was top of their dental class, right? So it's not that. It's more just they really understood that it took and it will take the hard work in doing it, and you just can't sit back and think
Yeah.
that it's going to come to you.
Yeah. It can't be 1 foot in. Yeah.
No.
And
No.
I see the people who commit to the process, kind of stay humble and want to grow and listen to people who can help them
Mhm.
grow.
Mhm.
They take action and they really fall in love with the journey
Yeah.
versus being so stuck on, I've got to make it to this outcome. And then you see sometimes people just come up with excuses of,
Mhm.
well, this person did this, or, it should have worked out like this. And a resilient person who, I think that's who it takes to hit that $1 million in the first year. They will look at maybe failures, setbacks as feedback. And what's the
Mhm.
learning lesson here? And how can I take this to not make the same mistake again
Yep.
and really grow from this situation versus complain?
Mhm.
And we've all
Mhm.
done it. We've all blamed this or that for our business, but I think the people who continue to grow and, the people who look at things more optimistically or find the positive in a situation,
Yep.
you can just keep growing. You can literally be wherever you want to be. And we've seen this even within orthodontics, the people who want to build these huge practices, they can,
Mhm.
and if they want to stay very boutique and really focus on profitability, they can do that too. So you can kind of create whatever you want to create if you commit to the process, and
Right.
nobody's going to do it for you.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're so right on, and what you just said. I mean, that's exactly it. Those attributes that you just see those, very consistently. And I think about, again, because I'm pretty sure we're going to have 3 hit this year, and for all intents and purposes, most people were screaming about how horrible 2024 was, right? We've
Mm-hmm.
heard it over and over. Oh, it wasn't a great year. Oh, this, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
And to think I'm pretty sure we'll have 3 hit this year, by the end of our year. I go, again, that's a lot of just hard work, doing what they need to do. And I always tell my docs, take a minute anytime we get to an end of a contract. And I always say, okay, I just want you to take a minute and look back, because I think one of the biggest disservices we do to ourselves as owners, and business owners, is to we're always looking ahead and we never take a chance to like really revel in what we've done.
Mm.
It's always like, oh, I got it. Now it's the next thing. It's the next thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I always like to, have an end of the year, meeting with my docs. And I'm like, okay, now I just want you to, I want you to look back and go, we started at 0. Like you had
Mm.
no patience. Nobody knew your name. Nobody, I mean, like you had nothing, nothing. And now look at the number that you're at. There, you didn't think you were going to do this and you did it. And now next year we're just going to double that. And it's
Mm.
just such a fun thing to like, let them just kind of sit in that for a minute, no
Yeah.
matter where, no matter what number they hit. But it's especially exciting when we have those big numbers and they're like, yeah, you're right, I did do that. And I'm like, yes, you did, doggone it, now
Yeah.
celebrate yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and what a moment, that's incredible to be able to celebrate that with the business
Mhm.
owner. So cool. Well, for those watching or listening, how can people get in touch with you?
Sure, sure. So, my business is Jill Allen and Associates. You can go to our website. That's probably the easiest way. www.practiceresults with an S.com. You can just pop right on, talk to Jill, fill out a form. It'll take you right to my Zoom link, and we will be doing a call. If you're ever, I mean, they've got this great podcast, but if you ever want to, listen to one that's a little more geared towards startups, I have a podcast called Hey Docs. You can pop onto that at any point as well. But
Yeah.
those are probably the 2 easiest ways to reach out.
Awesome. Well, this has been so fun. I'm glad
Yes,
you were
yes,
able
Luke.
to come on. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.